On a cold Seattle afternoon, Michael Turner drove home earlier than he ever did on a weekday. This guy, a heavy sheet of gray over the quiet neighborhoods he had known for more than a decade. He usually stayed late at the architecture firm, buried in drawings, measurements, and endless decisions. But that day something inside him ached for rest, for warmth, for the familiar comfort of his home. He told himself it was only exhaustion. He told himself a quiet evening with his family would fix everything. As he turned into the driveway, he noticed the house lights were dimmed. The curtains half closed, even though it was barely past 4. It felt unusual, but he pushed the thought aside as he grabbed his bag and headed to the front door. When he stepped inside, the air felt different still. Warm, almost too warm. The kind of warmth that didn't come from heaters, but from people speaking in lowered voices. He paused in the entryway, trying to understand this strange tension pressing lightly against his chest. He set down his keys as quietly as he could. Not because he wanted to hide his arrival, but because the house itself felt like it demanded silence. He heard a soft laugh from the living room, a laugh he recognized as Claire's, gentle and melodic. But there was something unfamiliar underneath it. A man's voice, low enough that Michael couldn't make out what he said. Followed by Claire's reply, spoken in a tone that felt too light, too relaxed, too intimate for a casual visitor. For a second, he wondered if she had invited someone over for help with the furnace or some neighborhood project. But the way their voices blended didn't sound like two acquaintances discussing repairs. It sounded like two people who knew each other well enough to speak softly without needing to explain every pause. He felt something cold settle at the bottom of his stomach as he stepped farther down the hall, his shoes making almost no sound on the hardwood floor. He reached the corner where the hallway opened into the living room. But before he stepped into view, instinct stopped him. He didn't want to interrupt. He didn't want to confront anything. He didn't want to see something that might change everything he knew about his life. He took a breath, listening just enough to understand the tone, not the words. There was no shouting, no argument, no dramatic confession. There was only closeness, a softness in the voices that should not have existed between Claire and a man who wasn't him. He backed away slowly, feeling heat rise in his face while his chest felt oddly hollow. The house he had always seen as solid and dependable suddenly felt fragile, like glass that could shatter with one wrong touch. He walked toward the stairs, unsure where to go or what to do. Maybe he should confront Claire. Maybe he should walk right in and demand to know who the man was. But something in him trembled, fear, confusion, disbelief leaving him frozen. He walked to the kitchen instead, the one room farthest from the voices, and sat down at the small table by the window. He stared outside at the bare branches trembling in the wind. He felt like he was watching his own life from a distance. Like he had stumbled into someone else's home, someone else's problem. His mind raced through the past month's late nights at work, missed dinners, Claire's increasing quietness. The way she often seemed lost in her own thoughts, even when they sat across from each other. He had noticed the distance, but had convinced himself it was only stress, only routine fatigue, only a temporary drift that every marriage experienced. But now he feared that while he had been busy building buildings for other people, the building of his own life had begun to crack without him realizing it. After a few minutes, the voices in the living room grew quieter. Michael heard footsteps, the front door opening, a man's polite farewell, Claire's soft reply, and then the door closing again. He did not move. He did not want Claire to know he had heard anything. When she finally walked into the kitchen and noticed him, her surprise looked genuine, and he wondered whether he was imagining everything. She smiled, asked why he was home early, and kissed him on the cheek the way she always did. He tried to smile back but felt the expression strain like a mask. He didn't ask about the man. He didn't ask what they had been discussing or why their voices had sounded like two people sharing more than casual conversation. Instead, he gave her a vague excuse about finishing work early and needing rest. That evening passed slowly, heavy with words unsaid. Claire cooked dinner. Michael sat in the living room pretending to read emails. Neither asked the other about their day. Neither of them broke the strange silence hanging over the house like a cloud. When dinner was ready, they ate quietly. Claire talked about a neighbor's new dog, about a recipe she wanted to try, about grocery lists and holiday plans. Michael nodded along, trying to act normal. But his heart thudded unevenly in his chest every time he remembered the warmth in her voice with the man earlier. It wasn't proof of anything. It wasn't evidence of betrayal. But it was enough to unravel something inside him. After dinner, Claire went upstairs to take a shower. Michael stayed in the living room, staring at the dusty fireplace he hadn't used since last winter. The flicker of the small lamp beside the couch made shadows jump across the walls. He suddenly felt very small, as if the house he had built his life inside had grown too big for him all at once. He thought about calling a friend, but he didn't want anyone to know what he suspected not, when he wasn't even sure himself. He rubbed his forehead and tried to breathe, but the air felt thick. A few minutes later, he heard footsteps behind him. It was Evan, his 17-year-old son. Wearing an old hoodie and holding a bowl of cereal like he always did in the evenings, Evan wasn't loud or overly confident. He was gentle, observant, and carried his emotions like they were fragile objects he had to protect. He immediately noticed his father, still dressed in work clothes, sitting stiffly on the couch. Something about Michael's posture made him stop in the doorway. "Dad," Evan asked quietly, setting down the bowl on the coffee table. "You okay?" Michael turned toward him, trying to arrange his face into something calm. He didn't want his son to feel the weight of adult problems. He didn't want to let his personal fear spill into his son's safe world. But the worry in Evan's eyes made him ache. He lifted a hand slowly, offering a small, tired smile. "Easy, son," he whispered, hoping the softness in his voice would reassure him. "I'm fine. Just a long day." Evan didn't look convinced. He sat beside his father, close, but not intrusive. The way only someone who truly understands how to comfort without pressure can. He didn't ask more questions, but his presence was steady, almost grounding. The quiet between them didn't feel heavy like it had with Claire. Earlier, I felt warm, safe, calm. Michael realized as he sat there beside his son that sometimes a person doesn't need answers or explanations to know something is wrong. Sometimes knowing someone you love is hurting is enough. They sat together for a long time, the soft hum of the refrigerator echoing from the kitchen and the distant sound of running water upstairs signaling Claire was still showering. The moment held a strange mixture of peace and dread, peace from Evan's presence and dread from the truth Michael feared he would soon have to face. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know if Claire's heart had slowly drifted away from him, or if he was misreading everything because of exhaustion and fear. But he knew that something in their home had shifted, and life as he knew it might be about to change in ways he couldn't control. As he placed a hand on Evan's shoulder, steadying both of them, he silently prayed that whatever truth waited for him in the days ahead, he would find the strength to face it, not just for his sake, but for his son's. And as the night deepened and the house grew quiet again, Michael felt the fragile beginning of a truth he hadn't fully admitted yet. The life he thought was unshakable might already be cracking beneath his feet. The morning after that tense evening, Michael woke before the sun, staring at the ceiling of his bedroom as the soft light of dawn crept through the blinds. He felt restless, the kind of restlessness that pulls at your chest and refuses to let you settle. And he knew the day would demand answers he wasn't sure he could handle. Claire was still asleep beside him, her breathing steady, unaware of the storm swirling quietly in her husband's mind. Michael lay there for a long moment, tracing invisible patterns on the blanket, considering every small sign he had ignored over the past months: the quiet dinners, the hurried smiles, the way she sometimes seemed distant even when she was physically present. It had been easy to dismiss these as stress, as routine, but now he could no longer ignore the truth, whispering insistently in his mind something was wrong. And it had been wrong for longer than he wanted to admit. He got out of bed quietly, stepping into the cool morning air of the hallway, and felt the weight of uncertainty pressing against him like a physical force. He tried to calm his racing thoughts, tried to remember that there could be explanations, that perhaps he was imagining more than existed. But deep down, he knew that imagination would not undo the small fractures in their life that were already becoming cracks in the foundation. He walked downstairs, the house silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator, and found Claire in the kitchen, making coffee as the sunlight glinted off the mug she held with gentle care. She looked up when he entered, offering her usual morning smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Michael swallowed the lump in his throat, the combination of fear and longing that had been gnawing at him since last night. He took a deep breath and asked the question he had dreaded asking for weeks, trying to keep his voice calm, steady, as if the words themselves could protect him from the answer. "Claire, is there someone else?" The silence that followed was deafening. She didn't answer right away, and he watched her hands wrap tighter around the mug as if it were a lifeline. The truth was already there in the hesitation, in the pause that stretched long enough to make him wonder if he should step back, leave her space, pretend the question had never been asked. But he couldn't. Not now. Not after the night that had shown him the warmth in her voice that belonged to someone else. Finally, Claire's eyes met his, glossy with unshed tears, and she shook her head just slightly. "Yes," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, fragile but honest. She began to speak then, explaining in small, halting sentences, not to excuse herself but to be understood. She told him that she hadn't planned for it to happen, that loneliness and distance had crept into their marriage while Michael was immersed in work, that the connection she had shared with him had faded slowly, imperceptibly, until she didn't realize how far she had drifted. Michael listened without interrupting, though each word felt like a small fracture in his chest. He didn't feel anger at first, only an odd sense of disbelief, as if he were watching a scene in a film and not living it himself. And yet through the pain, he heard honesty, the kind that hurts because it's true. Claire cried as she spoke, tears falling silently down her cheeks, and Michael wanted to reach out to hold her, to understand. But he wasn't sure if the comfort he offered would heal or simply mask the deeper hurt growing between them. Their eyes locked for a moment, and in that silent gaze, they acknowledged years of love, of shared dreams, of mistakes, and of distance that had grown without either noticing until it could no longer be ignored. After she finished, Michael stepped back, letting her sink into a chair by the kitchen table, and moved toward the window. He needed air, perspective, something tangible in the world outside their home to anchor him. He opened the window slightly, letting the crisp morning breeze drift in, brushing against his face and reminding him that life went on, whether he felt ready or not. He walked outside, his shoes crunching softly against the gravel path, and let the sounds of the neighborhood children's laughter in a distance, birds calling from the trees, the faint hum of passing cars fill the emptiness pressing inside him. He realized that he had spent so long building a life that appeared perfect to the outside world that he had neglected the quiet moments that truly mattered, the conversations with Claire, the small gestures of care, the hours spent simply noticing one another. Those hours weren't lost entirely, but they had been pushed aside, replaced by work, routine, and the assumption that love would endure without constant effort. And now, faced with the undeniable evidence of distance and longing in another person's presence, he understood that love required attention, honesty, and the courage to confront not just infidelity, but the reasons behind it. He returned inside as the morning advanced, finding Evan in the living room, perched on the edge of the sofa with a book in hand. The boy looked up when his father entered, sensing immediately that something had shifted. He didn't ask questions yet, but the concern in his gaze was enough to pull Michael back into the present. Sitting beside him, Michael felt the mixture of fear and relief that sometimes accompanies honest moments. Fear because he had to navigate the unknown, and relief because he didn't have to pretend anymore. "Evan," he said softly, placing a hand on his son's shoulder, "we have some things to work through, but we'll face them together." Evan nodded, the silent understanding between father and son more comforting than any explanation. They sat quietly, the house humming around them, and Michael realized that the bond he shared with his son was unshakable, a foundation that could withstand more than the tremors of adult mistakes. For the first time in days, he allowed himself to breathe, to feel the steady reassurance of family even amid uncertainty. Later that day, Michael and Claire talked again, this time with more intentionality. They spoke of what had led them here, of missed opportunities to connect, of assumptions made without checking, and of the emotional distance that had grown unnoticed. It was difficult, raw, and sometimes awkward, but it was honest. Michael understood that anger alone would not restore what had been lost. And Claire understood that acknowledgement alone would not repair the damage. They realized that rebuilding trust required effort from both sides, small steps taken consistently, and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths without turning away. And as they spoke, a small seed of hope began to grow, that hope that awareness, care, and deliberate choice could guide them toward something stronger than before. They weren't certain of the outcome, but for the first time, they were certain that they would try, together or apart, with clarity and respect for each other's feelings. That evening, after a long day of emotional labor, Michael took another walk outside, letting the cool night air clear his thoughts. The streets were quiet now, and the soft glow of porch lights made the neighborhood feel calm, safe, almost protective. He reflected on the fragility of life and relationships. On the way, moments of closeness and distance can shape entire years without anyone noticing. And on the courage required to face truth even when it hurts. He thought about Claire, about the warmth he had felt in her voice the night before, about the honesty she had finally spoken in the kitchen. And he realized that human hearts are complicated, capable of longing, error, love, and regret all at once. He thought about Evan, about the boy who had offered silent comfort without words, who had reminded him that not all love stories are romantic, and who had become the anchor in a storm that felt relentless. And he understood that the path forward wouldn't be easy. Healing never is. It requires patience, attention, and the willingness to embrace uncertainty without giving in to despair. Returning home, Michael found Evan still awake, sitting on the couch with a thoughtful expression, as if he had been waiting for his father to return. "Dad, are we going to be okay?" the boy asked softly, the question simple but loaded with weight. Michael knelt beside him, looking into eyes that mirrored concern, hope, and trust all at once. "We'll be okay," he replied, choosing words carefully. "It will take time, but we'll get through this together, one step at a time. That's all we need." Evan nodded, a small, reassuring smile breaking across his face. And Michael felt a warmth that reminded him of why he had fought so hard to build this family, to protect it, to nurture it, even when life threatened to pull it apart. He realized that love, in its many forms, is what sustains people. They're quiet, steadfast love between parent and child, the renewed, deliberate love between partners who choose honesty over denial, and the gentle love for oneself that allows someone to stand, breathe, and face each day with courage. That night, as the house settled into quiet once more, Michael lay in bed beside Claire, not with answers or certainty, but with understanding. They didn't speak much, just shared the space and the presence that had always been the heart of their relationship. The night wasn't perfect. The day hadn't solved everything, but it marked the first step in a journey of healing, a journey that would require patience, honesty, and empathy. And in that quiet, shared space, Michael felt the fragile, yet undeniable truth. Even when love falters, even when trust is tested, human hearts are capable of renewal. And family, whether through choice, blood, or bond, remains a guiding light when everything else feels uncertain.